So we're working on a 2008 Ford Ranger with a 3-liter, and I'm changing the water pump in it. And I'm at the halfway point going back together. So I thought I would just show you what sort of needs to come apart in order to do this job. Now, in the repair manual, they do say to evacuate the air conditioning system and pull the compressor out of the way. And I'm not sure or not whether they want you to drain the power steering, but the compressor and the power steering pump are mounted to this cast aluminum bracket that sits in front of the water pump. So it needs to come off. On the other side, there is also another bracket that holds the alternator, and that will need to come off as well. So rather than opening up those two systems, I just loosened off the compressor with 3 bolts that hold that on that are this size. They're 13 millimeter heads. And then for the bracket that holds the compressor and the power steering pump, I removed, I believe it was these bolts here. So yeah, got those off. There's a long one that goes in the front, and then these two, they go down in the side. Actually, if you take a look down underneath of here, get my light, you can see there's a ground strap on the very bottom one, and then there's a hole just above it. And so they bolt into the side of the block. But you'll have to take those off as well to free this bracket up. I did notice once I had the water pump off, or taking it off rather, all the bolts had severe corrosion from aluminum. There was a lot of corrosion buildup on the threads. They're very difficult to get out. The threads are in this back portion behind. There's a sort of a front cover, and then the threads, I believe, are actually in the cast iron block. So they go through the water pump, through the front cover or spacer adapter, whatever it is, and then into the block. There was so much corrosion in that front cover portion that you would loosen it off and the threads would just get all jammed up in the corrosion. You couldn't actually get the bolt out, and man, they were a real bugger to get out. So I ended up having to use my impact gun with a wrench on the back of the bolt to get them to come out. And then took all the bolts to the bench grinder, cleaned them all up, and then chased all the threads just to make sure that everything was ready to go back together. I did take the water pump and trace out a little diagram to show you, or to remind myself rather, and to show you guys the orientation of the bolts. Most of them are the same as far as like these are all the same length, same thread pitch, all that stuff. But then you've got a couple smaller ones. So these are all 13 millimeter heads, and these ones are all 8 millimeter heads. So yeah, got all those out there. They just need to go back in now. Cleaned up the surface that the water pump gasket sits against. This one actually just runs a paper gasket, so I just had to make sure that everything was nice and clean and ready to go back together. So we're at the halfway mark now, and I'm gonna put these in and torque them down.
And you had to take off the fan,
Yeah,
and the airbox.
The fan and the shroud had to come out, as well as the airbox. Get yourself some extra room to get in there. The one thing to note is the fan itself is a left-handed thread. So this was I had a 22 millimeter wrench that fit on there nicely, and I'm not sure if it's just from all the rust, but it seemed to go on there half decent. Now there is a special tool that Ford wants you to use to hold the
Crank.
the pulley on the water pump in order to break this free, otherwise it'll just spin. So what I ended up doing was taking the belt, and I actually just stuck a wrench through here and then put that around the pulley, and then just hold the wrench, and that'll put enough pressure on the pulley to keep it from spinning, and then put my wrench on there and and break it free. But like I say, this thread is a left-hand thread, so to break it free, if you're standing in front of the vehicle, you're going to turn it clockwise. And obviously counterclockwise to tighten it on. One thing that I found was extremely stupid is this connector that goes into the alternator here. They put the locking tab on the inside where you cannot get your fingers on it and you have to use a pick. Just a wonderful design. This is the old water pump. You can see some of the paper gaskets still stuck on there. So the reason we were changing it was just from a leak. You can see where old coolant was leaking out and it's just all crusty and gross. So it was time for a new one. The tensioner here, this is the only one that you're going to need a Torx socket for. The rest are all just 10 mil, 8 mil, and 13 mil bolts. But this one is a T50, I believe it is. Yes, T50 Torx will fit in there. We did need the pulley that came off of this thing. I actually did swap it out because it was a little stiff and it was starting to become worn. You can just feel it. It feels very rough. And I was actually able to kidnap that pulley off of another tensioner, which I had on the shelf for a 2017 Ford Transit van. They were the same pulley. Tensioner assembly is different, but as far as the depth and the bearing size are all the same. So fairly cheap on Amazon for a tensioner pulley. I believe they're about 40 bucks. I'll leave a link in the description below if you want to go grab one of those. These were just off of another couple of vehicles. Ended up putting new tensioners on them, but the pulleys were fine. So I just take these off and keep them. So you never know when you're working on a Sunday and you need some parts. Perfect. We'll give you an update video here shortly when we get it back together. So we got everything back together now. I ended up filling up the cooling system with one jug of, I guess, Ford's coolant. Ended up getting it from CarQuest. But it was a 4-liter jug, and then you have to mix a 50-50 with distilled water. So 8 liters in total. That seemed to fill it up just perfect. I had enough to fill up the overflow reservoir. And yeah, I don't know what else to tell you really. Give it a wash down to get all the coolant and stuff off of it. Now, I am putting a belt on it tomorrow. It needed a belt, so I think I was telling you before, I ended up having to hold the pulley for the fan using the belt, and I slipped a wrench over it to grab a hold of that pulley. So it didn't really damage the belt at all, but the belt's squealing now, so it may just be from some coolant that got on the pulleys and now it's slipping on there. So I'll be putting a new belt on it tomorrow. That's about it. If you have any other questions, let me know in the comments below. And thanks for watching.